Welcome to Journey at Home. If it's your first time tuning in, we are glad you're here, and we would love for you to join us in person sometime if you live here in the Murray area. I am Matt, by the way, and we create content here to make it simple for you to follow Jesus and live a better life. So if you find today helpful, just hit the subscribe button and the bell for notifications so you don't miss any of this content. And let's get started by having a little fun. Do you know what an oxymoron is? It is when combined terms contradict one another. For example, jumbo shrimp, plastic silverware, working vacation, University of Tennessee champions. Those are funny ones, but here's one that's not. Generous Christians. You may know that the average American gives 2.5% of their income away every year. Now that's not surprising for me. If I didn't have the Jesus-informed value system I do, this is exactly what I would do. I would take care of myself first, and then if I had any left over, I would give from it. But the more troubling stat to me is that the average Christian gives 2.5% of their income away every year. In other words, there's no difference. Now, just to give you some context, guess what percentage the average Christian gave away during the Great Depression? They were giving 3.3% of their income. They gave more during the worst economic time in the last 100 years than we do now. And of this 2.5% of Christians who give, this small group of us that give this amount of money, only 4% give 10% or more of their income away. My point is, very few of us understand generosity. So how can we have been given so much? Those of us who are Jesus followers, how can we have been given so much and yet give so little in return? Well, I'm going to guess that most of us want to be generous people, and we hope others see us as generous people. So why statistically are we not? Well, this is the third and final episode in our series, Money Monsters, where we're not just talking about what to do with money, we're talking also about what money is doing to us, because money has a sneaky impact on us both personally and spiritually. So in episode 1, we identified the appetite for more and the pride monsters. Those tend to lead many of us into a life of financial pressure or debt or mismanagement of what God's given us. And then episode 2, we discovered that related to those monsters is the greed monster. Greed's the assumption that everything I get is for my own consumption, and there is a relationship between our greed, our pride, and our lack of discipline. Now today we're going to discover the fourth money monster, which is a cousin to the first three, because if you keep peeling back the onion, you discover there is something for most of us even deeper than greed or pride or an appetite for more that is driving our inability to practice generosity. It's the monster of fear. Fear is usually the barrier that keeps our intentions, I want to be generous, from becoming action. I'm going to give money joyfully. Now, if you're a Christian, you got to take this seriously because fear is one of the primary barriers to you having a growing relationship with Jesus. Following Jesus, the thing about it is it increases your exposure to a lot of potential fears because Jesus rarely leads us to comfortable places. Following Jesus takes us right into the middle of uncertainty, and it forces us to trust Him. Why? Because you can't have a healthy relationship with God unless it's built on deep trust. But this is also why we have such a hard time doing what Jesus invites us to do, because trust requires following Him in spite of our fear. And I don't know that many of us are very good at that. More often than not, fear has a grip on the steering wheel of our lives, and it is that fear that limits our ability to know and experience Jesus personally at work in our lives. And I don't think there's any area where we feel this tension more strongly than when it comes to our generosity. Now, if this makes you feel any better, this is not a new problem. Around AD 55, the second great famine hit Jerusalem and the surrounding region, and there were Christians from places like Macedonia and Galatia that heard about it, and they began making plans to give some of their money to help these people in Jerusalem that had been impacted. And then the church at Corinth, they decided to jump on board, and they promised, hey, we'll contribute to this as well. Now, these people didn't all know each other, but they were willing to do it. So all these churches decide, we're going to send some representatives from each of our churches along with the Apostle Paul, and they'll deliver this money to the Christians in Jerusalem. Now, these Corinthians, they had the best intentions to be generous. The problem was, after they made the promise to do it, the fear reached up and it began to choke their generous impulses. So Paul actually has to write them a letter to guide them on how to overcome their fear, to be who they really wanted to be and not miss what God wanted to do in and through them as they impacted the lives of people they would never meet in Jerusalem. And here's part of the advice that he gave them. He said, "For I know your eagerness to help." In other words, you have the best intentions, your heart, it's in the right place. And he says, "I've been boasting about it to the Macedonians." I've been telling them that since last year, you in Achaia, you were ready to give, and your enthusiasm, well, it stirred most of them to action. So Paul's going, hey, you made a promise over a year ago to help these people in Jerusalem. And I've told all the Christians up in Greece you're going to do it. Remember how excited you were to give? Remember how pumped you were about this? Well, they're so inspired by your enthusiasm that they're going to make a big gift too. So Paul's going, I know your heart's in the right place. I know you have the best of intentions. But, he says, I'm sending the brothers, part of his team, I'm sending the brothers to you in order that our boasting about you in this matter shouldn't prove hollow, but that you may be ready as I said you would be. And then he says this, he says, for if any of the Macedonians come with me, and they find you, when we get to Corinth, they find you unprepared, well, we, not to say anything about you, would be ashamed of having been so confident. In other words, Paul's going, I am hearing some rumors that you're getting scared, that you're starting to come up with excuses why you can't be as generous as you promised you would be. Sounds like you're talking yourself out of doing what you wanted to do. And it'd be really embarrassing if we showed up and you didn't follow through on the generosity that you promised. So Paul says, I thought it was necessary to urge the brothers to visit you in advance and to finish the arrangements for this generous gift you promised. Then Paul says, it'll be ready as a generous gift, not as one, this is important, not as one grudgingly given. In other words, Paul's going, hey, when we show up, I don't want you to be making this gift out of obligation. I don't want you to be a fearful giver, and we just have to pry that money out of your hands. But fear's gotten a hold of your heart. It's defeating your good intentions. You want to be generous, but fear's left you wondering, see if this sounds familiar, if it's responsible for you to be generous. That is the natural fear that raises its head and chokes out our best intentions to be generous people. The problem with generosity is it is in direct conflict with our desire for self-preservation. In other words, we all start asking, well, what if I need that money down the road? What if I run out of money in retirement? What if I can't get something I want because I gave something I had already? What if I can't provide something for my kids that everybody else seems to be providing for theirs? What if I don't have enough because I gave too much away? So here's the question. What do you do when those desires clash? Well, most of us, as much as we want to be generous, we choose self-preservation. This explains why the average Christian gives 2.5% of their income away, and they're no different than somebody who's not a Christian, because we feel responsible for providing all of our own needs. And those fears just kill generosity, which means we only want to give from our leftovers. We give after we've covered all of our needs. The problem with giving from your leftovers is, well, your generosity can never make its way to the front of the line because there's always a fear there to stop it. So Paul introduces them, he introduces us to adopt a different mindset that's going to allow us to overcome fear. Here's what he tells them. He says, remember this, whoever sows sparingly, he's using a farming analogy, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously. This is farming 101. If you don't sow much seed, you won't reach much crop. You're not going to get much. So what could possibly prevent a farmer from sowing all their seed? Well, actually, before crop insurance was a thing, this was a real problem. Some farmers would let fear influence their planting decisions. After all, what if I sow all my seed and then a flood comes and I lose it? What if I use it all up and then a drought shows up? What if there is no crop to reap? Then I'm broke. But by fearing the uncertainty of the future, what they were actually doing was preventing themselves from experiencing the rewards of the harvest. And Paul says that same principle is true with the generosity of Jesus' followers. There is a direct correlation between how much you give and how much you get back. The more you sow, the more you reap. Now, just to be clear, he's not talking about getting more money back, although that sometimes happens. He's talking about impact. Impact in your own life. Impact in the lives of people around you. This is really great news if you're somebody who might be considered a reluctant giver. And you're reluctant just because you're uncertain of what the future holds. Listen, if you want the odds to be in your favor of reaping a bigger harvest tomorrow, you have to plant with generosity today, Or the way Paul put it to the Corinthians, he said, each of you should give what you've decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly, not under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And then he makes this promise, and God is able to bless you abundantly. So that in all things at all times, having all that you need, you'll abound in every good work. What Paul's referring to here is that when you began following Jesus, this is important, you actually signed up for a countercultural economic system. Jesus puts you on a different special compensation plan from the average person. Instead of looking out for you first, Jesus says, all right, here's how this works in my kingdom. I want you to look out for others first. And if you'll do that, I promise to take care of you while you look out for others. Which means if you choose to prioritize others by being generous first instead of being generous last, Jesus promises to make sure your needs are met. You don't have to be limited or held back by the fear of self-preservation. Stepping out of your comfort zone when Jesus asks you to, that's not irresponsible either. It's often a necessary act of trusting God. It means you are turning down all the what-if voices in your head, and you are turning up the trust in Jesus. And every time you trust God, your relationship with Him grows. You learn things about Him you wouldn't otherwise know. You discover He's trustworthy in ways you haven't experienced anymore. This is why Jesus-guided and Jesus-modeled generosity is crucial if you want to have a growing relationship with Jesus. Our money and our giving is the most tangible, practical, powerful expression of trust that many of us are ever going to make. So you want to be generous? How do you beat the fear that's holding you back? Well, you just move ahead in spite of it. It's the only way to overcome fear. You just move right into it. So I want to give you 3 options for how to do that, depending on your current generosity level. Okay, first, for some of you, the next step is for you just to make generosity a priority. In other words, you need to decide you're going to flip your financial decisions, and you're going to put others first, not yourself, by giving first before you take care of all your stuff. So that just means you decide to give something every time you get paid. I'm going to give first before I do anything else. Now, for others of you, your step is to make generosity a percentage. You may give something from time to time. You may even give something regularly, but it is not based on a percentage of your income, which just means you're probably giving about 2.5% like everybody else. And you should pray about and then pick a percentage that you believe is generous, and then give it every time you're paid. Now, the third group, some of you, you've been doing this for a while because you were taught to do it, but you haven't changed what percentage you give in years. And for you, the next step is you need to be progressive with your generosity. In other words, you need to pray and ask God how much He wants you to increase the percentage. Because it's all His after all, right? So it's His call. Now, why do that? Well, because it's how you overcome fear. It's how you grow. It's how you know God better. It's the only way to slay the money monsters in your heart. So here's what I know about you. I'm the same way. We don't want money to control us. But generosity is the most powerful, the most effective way to control money. So pick a period of time that you're going to try this, okay? Just see if it doesn't build bigger trust in God as you rely on Him to provide all you need. See if it doesn't free you from the money monsters inside of you and inside of me.